Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to today's webinar, Virtual Reality Gets Its Commercial Real Estate Moment. I'm Musa Akel, Knotel's Director of Marketing, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day to join us. I think you'll find today's session particularly enlightening. We've got two of Knotel's top workplace strategists on the line, and we're also joined by a special guest, the CEO of IrisVR, Shane Scranton, who I'll introduce here in a minute. But lots to cover, so let's dive in. Quick agenda and some housekeeping we'll cover as well. But I realize that I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. It's quite a precarious time, as we all know. I'm here in New York along with many of my colleagues at Knotel. For those of you who are following the news, the phase 2 of reopening here in New York City started earlier this week, and that includes sending employees back to offices and workspaces as well. So we've been working very closely with our customers here in New York on building and starting to execute some of those return to workspace plans. Understandably, I think the volume of people going back is quite small this week, and we'll see it slowly start to ramp up, although we've seen some of the statistics on the curve not really flattening here in the US, whereas some of our counterparts in Europe, and particularly in Paris, have not only done a great job of flattening curve, they are almost back to normal occupancy. So again, hope you're all doing well and staying safe. We'll try to add some value to your day. I know we've got lots of brokers and owners and tenants on the line. VR will become a big part of this new normal in commercial real estate, kind of post-pandemic, and we'll get to hear from Shane and Christina and Sean today during the session. So again, thanks for joining us. We're going to hear a little bit about VR and CRE. Sean and Christina will take us through some specific use cases and examples to make this as kind of real as possible. We'll do, it's not a live demo quite exactly, but we'll show a 4-minute pre-recorded demo of the IrisVR platform. Very pretty cool stuff, and we'll hear a lot from Shane as well, who's working with customers all around the globe as they start to either begin to use VR or maybe expand upon some of their use cases. As always, we'll make this informative. Please send in your questions, use content@knotel.com, or submit those through your Zoom interface at the bottom. Again, without further ado, we've got, again, Christina Cooper, Sean Lyons, and Shane Scranton. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day to join us. Again, Christina and Sean, two of Knotel's top workplace strategists, and Shane was kind enough to carve out some time to join us today. Christina, why don't you kick us off just a little bit about your background, and then we'll go to Sean and Shane and let the audience know why this trio is particularly well qualified to address today's topic.
Sure. So I'm Christina. I lead our workplace strategy and design team in our New York market at Knotel. I've been at Knotel for about 2 years, and prior to that, I spent about 7 years at Gensler doing interior design and workplace strategy for a bunch of different customers, and definitely saw the evolution of things like VR and a lot of other like digital products and things integrated into the workflow. So I'm excited to talk about that today.
Hey everyone, echoing Musa, thank you for joining, and Shane, thank you again for joining as well. I'm Sean. I work on Christina's team. Similar to what Christina said, have kind of watched the evolution of all things visualization on the customer side at Knotel. And previously I worked on urban design and planning projects in New York, which is kind of how and where I was first exposed to a lot of the 3D modeling and VR and visualization that we employ now.
Thank you guys for hosting me. I'm Shane. I'm the CEO of IrisVR. Originally studied architecture, went into the architectural design world, got really into sort of the 3D side of architectural design, and founded Iris back in 2014, right when sort of this current generation of VR really started taking off. So we've been working on this for over 6 years now, primarily focused on real estate, construction, engineering, architecture, and building out software for that space. So really excited to talk through this stuff.
Great, thanks Shane and Christine and Sean. Look, Shane just said it. I think Shane was at 2014, right? So this is not new necessarily, virtual reality and commercial real estate. for many of us, I think that the dominant kind of image in our head is probably of selling and touring for customers who maybe aren't able to get into a space physically, or there's a scalability to using VR to see spaces that are in different cities and countries as well. But there are tons of different use cases for VR, some of which you'll see on screen. I think some of the use cases, Shane, that we'll probably start to see kind of post-pandemic, or as we hopefully get to a post-pandemic phase, maybe will revolve more around reconfiguring workspaces in some cases to accommodate social distancing and health and safety recommendations from government and local authorities as well. Shane, in your experience, again, you've been doing this for 6-7 years. What are some of the more popular use cases, particularly if they're on this page, or what are some of the more common ways maybe you were seeing some of your customers use VR in commercial real estate maybe a year or 2 years ago? And any thoughts on what you're going to expect in the next couple of months and years?
Yeah, so fundamentally, what VR and AR delivers is a sense of scale, a sense of space, a true understanding of something that's inherently digital, and that has a lot of significance, of course, in all of these applications for real estate. So being able to make effectively on-site decisions or in-office decisions while you are not in the office, of course, is incredibly relevant during COVID, but was relevant before then as well, where inherently there's going to be large project teams making decisions around layout, making decisions around furniture, making decisions around materiality. And the more that you can effectively stand in the space digitally and make that decision as if you were standing there physically, saves a ton of money. And you can cut a ton of costs by making those decisions in a headset digitally across different teams. And you can sort of see the way I'm describing this. A big part of our focus has been, and a big part of sort of VR's promise has been, the collaboration layer. So when VR first came out, it was really seen as a solitary experience. You needed a big computer hooked up. You needed a lot of cables. You were sort of making a lot of stuff by hand. And the ecosystem's evolved now to be focused much more on collaboration. All the hardware is a lot easier to use and engage with. And as a result, you can have teams in different places, either on a computer or in a headset, all joining essentially the same digital meeting to have those conversations and make those decisions. So that's today. Where we see that going in the future is really just easier and faster. The headsets are looking less and less like that image you have and looking more and more like sunglasses, right? And we are trending in a direction where the hardware is getting much more lighter weight and much faster, which makes the accessibility of these tools much better and much easier to engage with.
That's interesting. You talk about the hardware, Shane, being better and more intuitive and more dynamic, but also don't you also expect to see the costs come down as you start to see kind of adoption increase and scalability start to grow as well?
Yeah, I think what's been good for the VR AR space is a lot of these large hardware manufacturers have focused primarily on consumer applications. And I think folks on this call have probably seen the benefits of that in the past with things like the iPad, where there's tremendous business applications for them, but the prices are driven down by the consumer market. So right now, the headset that we typically use with customers is about $400. It ranges from like $400 to $1,000 depending on the setup, and that's the all-in cost for the hardware. So that's incredibly accessible for teams to engage with.
And for those of you on the line, I'm sure some of you have put on a VR headset at some point. I did early on in my tenure at Knotel, and wow, I still remember, I think, Sean, I was with you. I still remember it pretty vividly. But moreover than just being kind of a magical, immersive experience, there is strategic business value to using VR, and we're gonna hear from Shane a little bit later on kind of the time and cost savings for senior decision makers who are looking to, again, to move the needle on the bottom line. So Christine and Sean, interested to hear from you. How have you two been working with clients? Again, let's maybe go back pre-pandemic, some of the more prominent use cases, some of your interactions with clients with regards to VR. Any particular stories to call out?
Well, I think in general, and I'll circle back to a point that Shane made, words like scale and place, while they may kind of seem like line items at times, they're actually just very, very important in selling such a physical product. So I think that's where, VR as it relates to the customer journey really takes a step ahead. Musa, if we want to jump to the next slide, one thing that's been really interesting to approach being at Knotel is that we really consider design and the customer journey many times simultaneously. So, the timeline at the top of the page kind of illustrates a more traditional, space acquisition process where many times, and this is aligned with most design and delivery in architecture and construction, many times a client or a customer is not able to begin visualizing what they and their company and their identity will look like in a space until well into the customer journey, maybe even after the agreement and the possession of space has taken place. I think what we've learned at Knotel is that often this is already can be a complicated and confusing process. And the trick is to eliminate as much confusion and opacity as possible. And if we're able to help the customer visualize earlier on in their customer journey, it benefits all parties. It allows us to coordinate faster. It establishes more trust with the customer. We're able to, elevate their vision aligned with our vision for what they could look like and feel like in the space earlier. Certainly want to leave a minute or more for Christina if you have any input here.
I mean, I think you covered it. I think the one thing I'll say is, and I've said this on other webinars about workplace strategy concepts and other things, it's like we were using it, we were getting good feedback on tours, and it's definitely useful, and like we knew that. But COVID is pushing us like way further into that world because it's so necessary for people to be able to visualize, what it's like to be in the space and to make decisions. To a lot of the points Shane made earlier too. That it's pushing us down that road, but it's not just because of COVID, right? It's just revealing something that's kind of existed to a lot of people as a really good tool for us to use to speed up the process, to get buy-in, all the things Sean just said.
Yeah, that's well put, Christina. We've seen this quite a bit over the last couple months, right? That what COVID has done, in a sense, fundamentally has accelerated a lot of trends that were already here, but maybe fast forwarded a couple of years to maybe a world in 2025 where adoption of some of these technologies is significantly higher than it would have been if we had not had a pandemic in 2020. So interesting here. Let's move on. I know Christine and Sean have we've got some great examples, and we'll talk about kind of particular property as well. But I'll let you guys take it back from here.
Yeah. So I'll kind of run through this as an example of the customer journey I just mentioned quickly. But for instance, as I'm sure many people who are listening in are very aware, when you're talking with a customer about what their next workplace is going to look like, in the back of their head, they're probably already envisioning themselves taking that next step. And, they have an idea of the neighborhood and what that means for them, and the building and the quality, the class of the office space, how that relates to where they want to be. They're already envisioning this. And so usually the building and the neighborhood do a lot of the talking. If you go to the next slide, Musa. But often the case is that there's either another tenant who is in the space currently, or there was a tenant and it's now a vacant space, or it's a furnished sublease in many cases, or it's being built out and it's in a quote unquote white box condition. So at a high level, a lot of the problems that you run into is that many customers without specific design backgrounds, which people with design backgrounds are only a small segment of the population, it can be very difficult for them to really visualize what they and their company will look like in the space. And I think this is, again, something that's been a little bit unique to our experience at Knotel, where we're kind of blending and bridging a traditional CRE sales process with an in-house design and strategy, project management, architecture, and delivery team. So we kind of need to focus on compressing that process and establishing trust and alignment with the customer as soon as we can. If you go to the next slide, Musa, please, thank you. So, for instance, this is usually kind of a cornerstone of any space offering or deck or overview, the plan. This is objectively conveying what exactly is or could be in the space, how we categorize space types, and our approach. The key word there being objective. A plan doesn't necessarily, usually doesn't leave much room for nuance. It doesn't evoke emotion or a sense of place very often. It can be very difficult for a customer to really sense and feel what the space would look like and how that dovetails with where they want their company to go. If you go to the next slide. As soon as we're able to take a plan into 3 dimensions, it becomes much easier for the large majority of people to put themselves in a space. And this is, conventional visualization that has happened in architecture for many years, previously by hand, now rapidly accelerating with a number of technologies, core being Revit. But the takeaway here is that we live in a 3-dimensional world. Our brain thinks in 3 dimensions. Why should we be representing our product in 2 dimensions, whether it be in plan or section or elevation, when really what we're conveying to the customer is not only are you buying physical space, but there's, again, more nuance to it. It's not just a space, it's a place. It's going to be a place where your company evolves and grows its identity. And we need to eliminate as much confusion in conveying that message as possible. You could go to the next slide, Musa. So, the first thing that we want to do is we want to communicate. We want to be effective at communicating 3-dimensionally at all times. So that comes in the form of working in 3D and designing in 3D, because what we're going to deliver is, of course, in 3D. And beyond modeling and communicating in 3 dimensions, we found, to Shane's earlier point again, the amazing thing about VR is that it creates a sense of scale and allows a customer to really see themselves and understand the qualities and the dimensions of the space in a way that they weren't able to before, which is of utmost value in what is often a very stressed, compressed, frustrating, confusing customer journey. Christina, I'll hand it over to you for the next few slides, I think.
Yeah, I think you covered so many good points, and I think even earlier on we talked through, how Knotel, I guess, operates a bit differently than where I came from before, like traditional architecture firm, and compressing a lot of things together. And one way that we do that is through breaking our space types down into settings or different types of functionality of spaces. And what that winds up working super well when we're visualizing in 3D is like the ability to showcase what that could look like when you're swapping one setting for another setting, and that just becomes a really easy way for people to experience that. Musa, if you want to jump to the next slide. So I think that another thing, and Sean touched on it a little bit, is that we might be touring people at different times. Someone might be in the space, it might be a white box, all the things that he mentioned. And what VR also allows us to do is the ability to showcase, what your brand looks like in this space, and really help people visualize in a way that's different than just like a still rendering, what this could actually be as an experience for your employees, and how that translates into what will be your future office. And I think, that covers most of our portion, and I think we'll hand it over to Shane from here, unless Sean, you have anything to add.
I would just add, I think a big takeaway from our perspective in learning and deploying, VR as we speak to customers, is that it also we want to be as customer centric of a company as possible. And many times it gives our point of sale, who are often at a leadership position in the company, it gives them an opportunity to co-create with us. We're able to really understand their vision, and they're able to make changes early on. And we're just able to coordinate, which is like such an important word from traditional architecture, design, and construction, that it's so much about coordination and aligning all the involved parties, whether on the customer side or on the contracting side. And so we're able to kind of do the legwork for their vision as it relates to the product that we offer. Which, not to repeat what Christina's already said, but yeah, just a little bit of an added point from where Notel stands. But yeah, Shane, I would love to hear from you how Iris sees a similar workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start by piggybacking on what you guys are talking about too, with just the general digitization and 3D-ification of planning. I think a really important point with all of this is, and we're seeing this accelerated with COVID, but by no means is this because of COVID. You can do a lot more with a digital space than you can do with a physical space. And you have a lot more flexibility and a lot more fluidity, and let's call it superpowers, to really control a lot more of the buyer's experience, of the owner's experience, if you have full control of a digital world rather than a physical space you're touring. And that's things like being able to show different design options, that's being able to show different color palettes, or even completely different structural layouts. I mean, it's unlimited flexibility for free in a digital environment. And I think the VR layer, and the part we'll get to here, is like the VR layer. What got us so excited in the early days is it brings into that digital environment the experiential layer. And an analogy is like you wouldn't buy a car without test driving it, especially an expensive car. And there's not really a way to test drive spaces. You sort of build it as you're building it. The client's doing the test drive, and any feedback they have, you're getting that when you're already retrofitting the space, and you're going to be spending a lot of money to change anything that they don't like. And doing any of that earlier in a digital form in an effective test drive can just make that communication layer so much faster and so much more iterative. And definitely echoes what you were saying about communication in this industry is inherently spatial, and that makes communication on anything that is screen-based really difficult, because you're essentially trying to communicate scale and communicate design ideas in a way that's inherently a metaphor and inherently disassociated from the project. So that's what got us really excited about having a sense of scale and space in VR and in AR, and really being able to do a true experiential test drive well in advance of guys actually going into the space with furniture, paint buckets, hammers, and other tools. So that's where we started conceptually. And in practice, what that means for Iris and for companies in our space is the end user, whether that's someone in real estate, someone in construction, someone in engineering, really doesn't have more time for learning new tools in a new medium. VR is built off of like video game technology, and it's and we don't expect the industry to learn how to make a video game to use this tool. So we, in the very early days, were like, how do you sort of link an existing enterprise workflow with VR in a way that really abstracts all the complexity And so Iris has been focused from day one on what makes it one click, what makes it work out of the box, what makes it just super simple for anyone to engage with. And we are layered on top of essentially the 3D modeling workflows that a lot of firms are now producing. So Sean, you mentioned Revit. This is a technical diagram. I won't go too into it, but we support essentially all the main 3D modeling formats. So we have software layers into a lot of the 3D modeling formats. So anyone on the call, you'll need access to 3D models in some way, and happy to get into the details there because we're also really excited about scanning technology and how to create digital twins. But you need access to 3D, and then the rest of it's plug and play. So we'll show an example of this, but we essentially digest that whole file, and then in a couple seconds, it goes into effectively a video game environment that is truly experiential that people can join from the screen, or they can go in using a headset. And the VR headsets that we like the most are ones that allow for full motion tracking. So when you put on the headset, it's called 6 degrees of freedom, meaning it has sort of any way you lean, any way you walk, any way your hands move, it tracks all that motion. So you can be in the space and sort of really feel embodied in the space. And like your height will be correct. If you have colleagues in the space with you, like they'll be calibrated with their spaces. So everyone will have like a really accurate sense of scale, which is super important. And of course, really be seamless in a meeting environment. So to show this, if you go to the next slide.
Shane, before we do the video, your point earlier was just so compelling about the test drive, right? You know, I can't imagine a scenario in which I would buy a car before test driving it. What do you think has been the biggest obstacle for adoption for something that just, you know, on paper and logically makes so much sense? Is there stigma, lack of education? Is it intellectual laziness? Like, why would more people not do this? I've seen tons of your content material. You guys save companies thousands of dollars and just hundreds of hours by catching errors earlier on in the process. Like, what would you tell somebody who is, you know, has been debating getting started with VR and what argument? How would you make the business case?
I think most people on this call will feel this deep down is like, cars are manufactured and buildings are not, right? Like buildings have so many more things that are unique to that space. Even in a any sort of corporate office building where you're in theory just duplicating floors, there's so much complexity in a building that is unique to that building. And vehicles can be manufactured. So a lot of the architecture and construction industry talks about how do we get closer to the productivity of manufacturing. And a lot of the answer is through 3D digitization with tools like Revit. The biggest challenge, I think, the answer is we're getting there. Like the answer is this transition is happening. Like AutoCAD and 2D drafting started in the 70s and 80s. We've moved to 3D. Now we're moving to intelligent 3D, but these transitions just take longer because of the complexity inherent in the number of stakeholders getting a unique building constructed. So we're really excited by the pace of adoption. I think VR and AR has actually been adopted very quickly compared to previous technologies in this space. And that's accelerating now because the barriers to entry are getting lower. There are more services out there that make 3D models of your spaces much more quickly. There's a lot more tools that will do like scan to BIM, or will do sort of the 3D-ification of your space in a much more seamless way. And then there's the hardware, like I was talking about earlier, is now more accessible compared to where it was a couple of years ago. So I actually think the pace is moving along quickly. It's really a matter of finding the right solution for making the experience 3D. And like I know Notel has the design services where there is 3D models layered into it, which is excellent. And then once you have that data set, it's great for any operational tasks during building maintenance. It's also great for going into VR and doing collaboration. So short answer is it's going very quickly, and we're excited about that.
Good. So let's we're gonna get ready to watch this video, and I'm gonna probably, just to be safe, pull it up through here.
Oh, great. And yeah, I'll just narrate over it. There's no audio, but figure we can show sort of the full end-to-end process for using our tool so you guys can get a sense of it. So this is a big 3D model of an office building. It's about a couple hundred megabytes. And the way IrisVR functions is we have a plugin in these types of 3D tools where you just click send to VR, and then you pick all the views in your building that you want to see. And then you click start processing, and we essentially extract out all that data, all that geometry, sort of everything associated with that building. That would be like its textures, its furniture layouts, how the building is sited. We'll get like the sun position and sort of everything related to that building information. We extract effectively into a video game file. So behind the scenes, we're doing all that processing, and then we save it to essentially a VR library that you could manage with your own team, or you could share with your clients, and everyone would have access to the same VR library of projects, and you can sort of control it per project. So as I was talking, that process, this file in particular took about 5 minutes. I sped up that recording just so you guys don't have to wait 5 minutes for that to load, and then you're in. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in VR meeting in that project. This is actually a video we recorded while we were all social distancing in different places in the US. So that's me in an Airbnb a little while ago, joining my colleagues in other places in between New York and the West Coast. And we're all in this shared environment together with our headsets on, able to do things like sun studies. So looking at the effect of the sun over different times of day. As well as doing things for design review and showing different layouts. So an example of design review would be if you're in here with a client. This is an example where we saw that the soffit was way too low in this model, right? And don't know if that was an error, or don't know if we just noticed that once we were in VR. But through seeing that soffit height, we were able to flag it, take a measurement, and then make a comment for everyone else to resolve it later after the meeting. This is one other example where we are looking at this building facade, and we are able to essentially pull all the dimensions off of this facade, and we caught an error seeing that there was just some column spacing that needed to be resolved. So this is also me in headset flagging that as an issue in this design review with the client, saying that we need to fix that back in the original plans, and then making comments on that to resolve that later. And all of this, you can see as we're recording, is shared across everyone in the session. So wherever you are in the world, wherever you are joining from, you are able to see each other in space. You're able to talk to each other. There's voice and audio, so you can hear each other speaking. You can see each other's movements, and you're able to actually make those decisions faster. And then this is just a screenshot of all of us in our different spaces, recording what it actually looks like. You can see we have one person joining from desktop, so you don't have to have a headset. You can join from a computer as well, and interacting in this space. We'll probably talk about this a bit, but one really surprising thing for us during COVID, especially with VR, is you really do get a better social sense as well when you're meeting in a virtual environment. And we found this especially for times where people are in sales mode and are selling. You can pick up a lot on posture, on personality, and on receptivity to ideas based on how people act in the VR space. And you guys can probably tell we're keeping it very schematic. Like the avatars and the way people are represented is schematic, and it's to make sure that it doesn't feel like creepy if you're talking to like a real life digital person. But you can really pick up a lot on the human level interaction, which helps quite a lot in seeing how people are engaging with the space and moving through it. And this is the last shot of us just making some annotations and marking up the space so we can make comments.
Wow, that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Shane. Wow, very cool. Give you guys a taste of Iris in action. Sean, why don't you, I know let's close this out here. I mentioned this earlier, right? It was just kind of a fascinating experience watching that for the last 4 minutes, but for business leaders and decision makers, right, there is a compelling value proposition for using VR. Again, I mentioned time and money, I think, are probably the two most fundamental mechanisms, right? Saving tons of time and saving money by catching issues early on. Why don't you talk through some of the ROI and any specific examples? I know, again, you on your website have tons of case studies and customer quotes. I encourage those of you on the line interested in learning a little bit more about IrisVR. There's tons of great content, but take us through this, Shane, and then we'll turn to Christina and Sean again.
Absolutely. So at a really high level, the way we sort of bucket the value of VR is into a couple categories. One is inherently collaboration. So just allowing people to meet from anywhere in the world can speed up a lot of the decisions that need to happen. And also in COVID is necessary a lot of times. I'll give some examples in a minute. Coordination is one that really matters in any build out and any time you're doing any construction management. Inherently, things are caught while construction is happening. The more you can catch before then, the more money you save. And we hear examples from customers all the time about this. Some big examples. We have one where there was a hospital renovation happening, and they were doing a walkthrough, sort of a pre-construction walkthrough with some of the doctors and nurses doing the rotations in the hospital. And in that pre-construction walkthrough in VR, there was a set of doctors that went into the standard typical patient rooms and said, oh, those sinks that are spec'd here are on the wrong side of the room. We need the sinks on the other side of the room. And like, super easy to change in a digital model, but that would be just millions and millions and millions of dollars to change if they made that comment when you had started constructing those sinks. In that same project, a handful of the nurses, essentially where the nurse station was, they were able to sort of position themselves in VR at that position and then judge sight lines to patient rooms. And through that test, they were able to adjust the nurse stations so that they had better sight lines to the patient rooms they needed to see. And they were able to adjust some cutouts in the walls and able to adjust how the station was actually set up so that sight lines were better for the staff that was working there. And those are all things that make a lot of sense to do early on, and you save a ton of money if you do that not during construction and do that during planning. And this fits into design review. I think a lot of people on the call are likely experiencing this from one end or the other, where at some point when you're looking at moving into a space or you're looking at building out a space, you are going to be looking at design options. And a lot of times the architects have put a ton of thought into how that will feel and into the flow of that space. And then also a lot of times it's really hard for you to actually imagine that. And we talk a lot about communicating design intent and understanding sort of the intent of the space and the human experience of the space. And this is, you could say this is softer value. At the same time, it could likely reduce the turnaround time of approvals by 10 to 20x. We have an example of a stadium retrofit where there was a central staircase that there was a lot of debate over on both the owner's side and on the client side and on the design side. And this was apparently a change order that would have taken 4 months-ish to resolve, and they were able to resolve it in one meeting by showing all the different options in VR. They brought everyone together from different places. They looked at the new proposed central staircase in VR, and they were able to arrive at a consensus literally in a meeting, and they had projected it would have delayed them a few months otherwise. So design review matters, and design intent matters, because then you can have everyone aligned to the same vision and speed up those conversations.
Excellent. Shane, thank you very much for that really informative stuff. And I know that we've got a great partnership between Iris and Knotel. Again, for those of you who are maybe new to Knotel, thanks for taking some time to join us today. We're a flexible workspace platform. We help companies build, design, and operate a workspace designed to empower and inspire their most expensive and their most important asset, their people. I know that Sean and Christina have been working diligently over the last couple months with customers on kind of return to workspace plans. This is kind of the conversation of the moment, of the month, of the year. Sean and Christina, I'd be interested, while we've got our geometry page up here, just any kind of final thoughts and or learnings that you two have discovered over the last couple months as you work with clients on building safety, continuity, and return to workspace plans.
Christina, I'll let you speak first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been an interesting time, and I think so much of what we've talked about in past sessions and other things and like with customers lately is all about just the evolution of the office and the connection between tools like VR and other things like that are just going to help people make these decisions so much easier, and also help, again, like the human element of this is becoming so important. It has been important, but is just becoming so top of mind for everyone. So the more we can just even humanize the process. And I think that like car example that Shane had was a great example, and also so true that buildings are just so different and there's so many moving parts in, there's engineers, there's the landlords, there's furniture dealers, there's so many people who have to get on board. So for how to just like reiterate Shane's point, like we're moving rather quickly for how many people have to be moving, right? But to be able to put all those things together and help people visualize, what your future office looks like, not just being full of desks, but what is the experience that people are going to use to come to the office, and actually showcase that through tools like VR, is definitely has been and will be continue to be really helpful. And then from a safety standpoint, I mean, just even being able to like reassure people through this is how we're going to handle safety in your space. And, we're talking about things that are listed on this page, like signage, what desks are going to be occupied or not, becomes a really good way to just kind of walk people through and get people ready to come back to the office. And even as like a change management tool in a lot of sense of like, if employees are feeling uncomfortable about this return to the office, here's a really great way to experience what it's going to be like in the space when you come back, and really what to expect when you come back to work.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo Christina's points because they're all so great. And Shane, you've touched on this as well. It's such a human experience. Being in the office is a human experience. And VR as a tool is one step closer, a big step in helping us communicate our product and the value of our product in a very human way. And to Christina's point, I think now we're in a time where the way the office works and why it's needed and why it works could look, and very well for many companies may look much different. And if we're able to communicate that vision in the most human way possible, it will, help us greatly in establishing that trust and confidence that we talked about earlier. So yeah, I'd also just like to say again, Shane, thank you so much for joining. We've had a great partnership so far, and it's certainly been great watching Iris grow since you guys founded the company. So thank you. All the best. I hope you guys have a prosperous year ahead of you, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great working with Knotel as well. Excited to see where the partnership goes. It's been great working together.
Well, thank you all of you, Shane and Christina and Sean. And we've got just 2 or 3 minutes left. We got a couple questions. I'm probably just going to field the most popular one. Seems to be the most common question. Before I do that, again, we've got this 23-page return to workspace guide we published a couple weeks ago. Tons of insights and signage and guidance that we've been sharing with our clients and other companies, brokers in the New York and community and around the world really as well. So if you haven't seen this yet, drop us a line, content@knotel.com. We'll send it your way. If you would like to pick Sean or Christina's brain, please feel free to reach out directly. Again, they are nobody better to talk to about workspace and workplace strategy than those two. And if you're interested in learning more about Iris, IrisVR.com. Shane, again, thank you for taking some time. Let's just ask the question that I think a lot of people are thinking, which is, what have you guys seen in the last couple months? Are people using VR, Christina and Sean and Shane, to start to do social distancing? And are they using VR to help reconfigure their workspace post-COVID? And if so, any example or two you want to call out?
Yes. Yeah, I'll have it first. The value of the digital space is you can model a 6-foot sphere and stick it around each desk, right? I mean, there's a lot of flexibility in the digital world to do all of the compliance and social distancing testing digitally. And so we have seen a number of customers do things like attach a 6-foot sphere to themselves in VR, walk around and see what they hit. Do things like really reimagine the flow of people through something like a kitchen, a shared kitchen space, or or bathrooms, and really use it as a way to show pedestrian movement. But it's not a simulation. It's literally just putting the goggles on and seeing how people walk through and documenting that and testing out different layouts that way. So absolutely, I think like especially around clearances and around what fits where, you can do a lot of that on the digital front, and then show that in VR to drive by, and I think, like Sean said, to get people more comfortable with coming back to the office.
Yeah, I would just add, and this is a point that Shane made earlier, that I think it's not a pain point currently where I think the VR adoption stands, is that not many of our customer companies don't have access to a headset. And as Shane mentioned, that hardware is evolving pretty rapidly. We have been able to leverage Iris to meet people in a, as Shane mentioned, digital space, which makes all the difference rather than talking them through a plan. And that's been really effective. But I think this is just going to become more and more adopted as, you may be getting your next VR headset from Warby Parker in 5 years. It's not, it's really moving so fast that I think it's going to become more and more important of, again, the customer journey.
Yeah, and I'll add on to it too. I think like so much of what we were talking about and like picking up on cues, and I think a lot of when you walk through that video, Shane, you were talking about like seeing people walk through the space and getting their reaction is so critical. And that's so critical in how we sell, especially at Knotel. We've always relied on tours and walking through the space, and our sales team reading people's body language. What are they asking? And that's going to be really hard if we're just selling, through computers. But if we have virtual reality, it becomes like the ability to still do that is there, and to take notes and do all these other things and let people ask questions in that environment is really helpful.
Excellent. We'll end there. Just a minute over, almost made it. Again, thank you all for taking some time to join us. Special thanks to Sean and Christina and Shane for enlightening us on VR and commercial real estate. Again, feel free to reach out, download some of our content, and stay safe out there. We hope to see you next time. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks.
Bye all. Thank you.